When I graduated high school, I traveled to 4 national parks: the Grand Canyon, Yellowstone, Glacier, and the Grand Tetons. And those experiences changed my perspective on the world completely. 2 years later, in the same week, I would embark on my 5th national park adventure, this time in Yosemite National Park. And this is the story of that adventure.
Get off wherever we feel. Hitch a ride with a highway stranger. Make up a story to tell. You're a spy who's addicted to danger, and I'ma never do well. Look at us go.
So we'll start on day 1, which started at about 4 a.m. East Coast time. Our first flight was at 6 a.m. East Coast time. We had to leave the house at about 5 to make the security and all those things. It may have actually even been a little bit earlier. I don't fully remember. But we arrived at Charlotte Douglas Airport, which is a little bit of a nightmare. Went through TSA, everything went smoothly. The only thing that didn't go smoothly was the Starbucks line was very long, so couldn't quite make that happen. About 5 hours later, between 2 flights, no real layovers and no real meals, we landed in Reno. The only logical first move for this group of Southern travelers here was In-N-Out Burger. We were starving, had to eat somehow. It was like 7 o'clock, our normal time whenever we got here, so it was time to eat, needless to say. All around, the travel day went fairly smoothly. Day 2, Lake Tahoe. Lake Tahoe doesn't feel like a real place. We entered close to the state park area on the Nevada side, and the drive didn't make sense. It didn't make sense how the difference in landscapes could even happen. It was like large dirt mountains, and then a beautiful lake, and then super tall snowy mountains. It was just insane, the difference between the landscapes on either side of the lake. The water was perfectly clear, as it is all year round. Glacier runoff and snowmelt will have that effect on the water, and it was beautiful. The far mountains across the lake still had snow on their caps. Northern Nevada and California got record snow this year, some places even getting up to 22 feet. And needless to say, with all of that snow and all of that melt and all of that ice, the lake was still very cold. We all touched it as a group. It was very cold, maybe like 50 degrees or something insane. And I did see people like kayaking and paddleboarding, and all I could think was they really, really trust their skills as a paddleboarder or a kayaker, because that water was very cold. Our goal with Lake Tahoe was to drive around the entire thing and see as much of it as we could. We did most of the pullouts and just did these little kind of traily walks. Nothing super intense. It was more about seeing something that we've never seen before. All around, exploring Lake Tahoe was a very relaxing and chill day, and it was an incredible start to what would be an incredible trip. Now we get to the midpoint of this trip, which I have appropriately named on my notes here, the Holy Shit Drive. I would learn later that it's actually called the Sonora Pass from our Uber at 4 in the morning whenever we left. We decided to get a hotel about halfway between Reno and Yosemite, so we had to go on the Sonora Pass, which is quite the drive, let me tell you. Effectively, what we had to do in this drive was scale one of the mountains in the Sierra Nevada mountain range, up and over. Through this drive, we would experience pretty much every single season. In the valley, there was summer. A little higher up, it was spring and crisp air. At the top, it was winter with large snowbanks on each side. It was insane, and I've never seen anything like it before. This drive kind of threw all of us for a curveball. We didn't know necessarily exactly what we had signed up for, and it was pretty much all now, especially looking back, a pleasant surprise. After the Sonora Pass, we would end up in a town called Sonora, California. We stayed at the Sonora Inn, very old, very vintage, I guess, and we ate cheeseburgers and had a nice night. We were all pretty excited that we didn't have to wake up at midnight anymore to go to Yosemite. That night in Sonora, I can remember being kind of antsy. I was like, I couldn't really go to sleep. I was just so excited, I guess. Now looking back, I can tell, I can self-diagnose myself that I was just so excited to go to Yosemite, to start the adventure, you know. And that was, I guess the emotions that I was feeling was just excitement. We decided to wake up at 5 in the morning to drive 2 hours into Yosemite. We had read online that parking was bad due to some shutdowns and some other kind of unfortunate situations and circumstances within the park, so getting there early was super important to be able to do what you wanted to do when it comes to activities. Driving into the park, you're immediately struck with the size of the mountains and the rocks. These are solid pieces of granite that are huge. The waterfalls off of them are huge too. And you could just tell immediately that you were in a place that was just magical. As we drove into the park, the controlled burns from the previous night were kind of winding down, but the haze and the smoke was still there. So it smelled like campfire, which if you're into that, like I am, it was insane. But it also put this like hazy, misty kind of shroud over the mountains and waterfalls. So all of my photos and videos from the morning have this like, it kind of looks like a film grain just over it. We arrived at the park and got our parking spot and immediately took off towards what was called the Mist Trail. It was about 7:30 in the morning when we started this hike at the trailhead, and it was about 1.5 miles, a lot of uphill. Not the easiest thing to do at 7 in the morning.
Mist Trail. Working on it. It's been straight climbing for a bit.
But it was an enjoyable experience for sure. The Mist Trail was fairly populated, but we had again read online that because of the record snowfall and just the excess melt, the rivers were extra high, which means that the waterfalls are pushing off extra water. So we only did half the trail because we didn't necessarily bring like wetsuits and waders and things like that to get soaked with. So we did half the trail, got to see like a really cool river type of situation, and I took some pretty sweet photos. And I was so happy to be out and exploring. It's what I love to do the most, and so that's what we did. On the way back down the Mist Trail, we were trying to think about what to do as a team. What was our game plan? We had read online that the best way to travel around Yosemite in the park was with the shuttle bus system, which wasn't necessarily the case. Because of the excess amount of people in the park due to shutdowns and a one-way traffic pattern, the bus can't really navigate around the park any easier than your car can. On top of that, everybody also reads that the bus is the best way to travel, so the lines are very long. Obviously, in the moment, that was very frustrating. We didn't necessarily know if we were even going to do anything worth doing on this trip. For a second, it seemed like all hope was kind of lost and that we had wasted our time. We regained composure as a team and decided to just drive around the park and pull out whenever we could hit the little off-road pullouts and see what we could see. That ended up being the best choice we could have made. We hit every pullout we could. We ended up doing a little loop kind of walk thing up towards Bridal Veil Falls, got really great shots and a great view of El Cap and Half Dome, and it was fantastic. Driving out of the valley a bit, we started to climb a hill. Our intention with driving up the hill here was to find some sort of picnic bench to eat our sandwiches. If you guys have never done a national park trip before, the way that we have always done it is we'll go to like a grocery store like the night before and grab pre-made sandwiches or snacks or whatever and throw them into the cooler so that way we can have, you know, some sort of a picnic. It's the best. We would find our picnic area and post up and have our sandwiches and just have a great little lunch. By that point, it was probably about 12:30, maybe even 1 o'clock, and we had been up since 5. Nobody was necessarily against the idea of being done for the day at the park. We had seen all of the main POIs. Maybe we didn't get to do as many activities as we wanted to, but we had seen everything from afar at least. Our next hotel was in a town called Fish Camp, California, just before the south entrance of Yosemite. We would have to drive basically the full length of the park to get to where we needed to go, to Fish Camp. So that's what we did. The last POI on the Yosemite Valley portion of this trip was Tunnel View, my favorite from this trip. Unfortunately, just the way that we came into the park, we didn't get to experience the true running or driving through Tunnel View, and then boom, there is Yosemite Valley. We didn't quite get to experience it that way. So whenever we got to Tunnel View, we pulled out onto one of the parking lot areas and stood there and looked at the valley for ever. It didn't even feel real. It didn't make sense how all of the POIs in a national park, you know, for the sake of argument, are right there. We would continue driving south through the park and end up at Fish Camp, California at roughly dinner time. I was super excited for our hotel from this night. It was much nicer than everything else that we had stayed in so far on this trip, and I was super happy for that aspect. The next morning, our destination was Mariposa Grove of Yosemite National Park. This was our last real adventure of the trip, so we were all very excited. Within Mariposa Grove are giant sequoia trees. It's kind of an isolated pocket of seemingly 50 to 100 giant sequoias. In this part of the park, there is a functioning shuttle bus system where you just park your car, get on the bus, go up to the trailhead, do your trail loop, come back on the bus. It's fairly simple. I would say that the whole entire loop that we did, which I think was called the Grizzly Giant Loop, I'm not 100% sure on that, was about 3.5 maybe miles, maybe not even that. It was fairly short, and it also wasn't very strenuous. We were all very excited to see these giant sequoias. You hear about them, they're kind of like a thing of mystery for us East Coast people. Like there's nothing like that out here. These are just, you know, regular old trees. Like a big tree that you think of out here is like a Christmas tree, you know? But when you see these giant sequoias, it really does put you in your place a little bit. The biggest challenge for me in this part of the trip was trying to figure out how to capture these giants. I felt like no matter what I did with my camera, I could only see so much of the trees. There's just no way that you can tell the scale. I think that photos of mountains and things like that, you can understand that it's huge, but these trees just don't make any sense. The Grizzly Giant is the oldest sequoia tree possibly in the world. It isn't the tallest by any means, but it has branches coming off of it that are as large as redwood trees. And then my favorite of the Mariposa Grove section was Tunnel Tree. It's gimmicky, I kind of understand. It seems like it belongs at Disney instead of a national park. But I think what it does for people is it gives you some sense of perspective. You could fit a medium-sized family in the tunnel of this tree. All around Mariposa Grove was probably the most welcoming section of the park. It was easy, it was convenient, everyone was so nice. It was just perfect. It's the less touristy side of Yosemite, I would say. But Mariposa Grove would conclude our trip to Yosemite National Park. My overall kind of response to Yosemite, what did I think, what are my honest reactions, is that there's no place like it. It may be the most beautiful national park that there is. All I could think whenever I was there was it felt like I was in a video game. And another thing that I thought of was Yosemite was the first national park ever photographed. And so that means that people in the 1890s are pulling horse and carriage and big crazy cameras through here. And that just makes you think too. It's really insane. I would say the only downside to Yosemite is the traffic situation. Eventually, I'm sure they'll get that figured out. So if you're going to Yosemite, expect crowds and expect, you know, you need multiple days. You can't do it all in one day. But yeah, I mean, it truly is one of, I think, America's best national parks. And I mean, I've been to 5. I think I can, you know, I have some level of perspective. But Yosemite is an incredible place, and I think everybody should go.